How's it going, eighth grade science teachers? I hope you're excited for this school year, or if you're viewing this later, I hope that your year's been going off pretty well. Today, I want to walk us through the scope and sequence, what that looks like, how it can be used, and all that. Want to simplify things, make this useful for you guys. So here is our eighth grade scope and sequence. Before we actually go through it, when I printed this out for my notebook, I saw, boy, this is really small. On the computer, you can zoom in, but when you print it, it's kind of small. So I thought, I might just be getting old, but it'd be nice to have a large print version. So if you double click on this image up here, that'll take you to a version of this. Nothing's changed, but instead of a single page, it's now 2 pages. Semester 1 is on page 1. Semester 2 is on page 2. Yep. And I've increased the font by about 3 different font sizes. So this might be easier when you print it off. You can have front back still, kind of a 1-pager, bit easier to view and navigate. So that's where I'm going to use today, just so on screen it's easier to see, and hopefully you find that useful, or you can use the other one. All right, what I want to do is I'm just going to go from the top down, walking through what things are, how you can use it for your planning out. The scope and sequence as a whole, probably not something you're going to use on a daily, weekly basis, more of overarching planning. Where are we heading to? Calling back to things when you're in quarter 2, say, remember how in quarter 1 we learned about this. So it kind of helps frame that. Might be good to tie back to your essential questions, but your curriculum maps are really what's going to be your driving planning force for weekly lesson plans. But this can still be pretty useful. So let's go through. First off, I mentioned the curriculum maps. Those are all linked here. It just works out that for a Discovery Ed, each unit is pretty much a quarter. There's only slight overlaps for various units and grade levels. So I'll have a separate video going over the curriculum map. So we'll leave that alone for now. And then you have your pacing here. Your pacing here is based off what Discovery Ed says should happen in this unit. That's going to be different for every teacher, every classroom in school. So this is a suggested pacing guide, but you do want to keep in mind that this is fairly accurate for where you want to be, roughly speaking. Some people will be slightly behind, and that tells you I'll need to cut out some concepts to make sure that I've covered everything before the end of the quarter. Or if you're ahead, you want to start thinking about what are some projects that I can put in here so that way students can dive in deeper. So that's how I want you to view the pacing. It's not me saying this is exactly where you should be, because I don't know exactly where you should be. Every classroom is a little bit different. But talking about reaching the end of this quarter, this is where your unit 1 test will be, or quarter test. I'm not sure what they'll call it, but it's based off of these 3 concepts. The questions for them, there's 20 questions for them. I've pulled from these 3 concepts, but I leaned more on the first 2 concepts just in case you were running out of time and you cut out some material for that 3rd concept. There's less questions from there. So you can look at the questions from the unit test if you're struggling for time, so you can focus in, okay, what is it that I really need to cover here to make sure my students are set up for success. So hopefully that helps everybody with pacing. There's a bit of flexibility in that unit test so that you don't have to rush and get everything covered in this last one. All right, units. So this tells you the title of them, which often helps you understand, okay, what are we kind of talking about? But I've also linked to the intro pages on Discovery Ed. I'm going to have a separate video for how to navigate Discovery Ed, where everything is. But hopefully with the scope and sequence and my curriculum map, I've built in links well enough that you don't have to learn how to navigate this right off the bat. But as you progress and move throughout the year, I think it'll become natural how this all lays out. And then you'll be able to utilize the resource more. That's my hope. But it takes you to the intro page. Actually, I pulled a lot of this information off the intro page and built it into the curriculum maps because it was some useful information like these vocab strategies. You'll find those in the curriculum map. So you won't necessarily have to come here, but it's a good way to kind of get to your concept right off the bat. It's also where I got the essential question. So why do space objects fall to Earth? That's the first question talked about in 8th grade. And as you can see, that's right where the central question comes from. So remember, as you're going through concept one, we're talking about this gravity, objects in space, tie everything back to that, and students will be able to connect with it a bit more. Moving on down, you have proficiency scales. If you're new to the district, these were created a couple years back. Somebody else put these together. They are useful. Now, they're not my documents, but I think there's some use in them. So I'm not going to be going through and updating or changing these. So if you found these useful in the past, they're still here, and it'll still be here in the future. But this was a project of somebody else. So there's some really good language here for, okay, this is what my students should be able to do. This is approaching. This is my students who have mastered a certain content. And then this is, oh, if I want a student to go above and beyond, here's what we can work on. So if you want to dig into that or used it before, this can be useful. I've kept it in our planning. And then you got the standard alignments. These come straight from Discovery Ed, which standards they are. And if you want to dig in deeper and break down a standard and how can I cover this better, especially for those who have the time and really want to cover those so students are map ready, instead of having to dig through the DESI document pages and pages and find the right one, this link takes you just to this one standard in the right spot, hopefully very useful for you. The last two things come from Discovery Ed as well. Your performance tasks, these are really cool. Most units or concepts have one, but as you can see, some have two or three. I'll go ahead and open one of these up. So these are, you would assign to students at the end of a concept, and it helps really take all of their learning and connect it to a real world situation and answer questions. And so you can see in this performance task, they have to do some reading. There's images, videos, data and graphs, and then students have to answer questions. And so I think that's a pretty useful way to assess students on how they take their learning and apply it to the real world. You might use this for a class activity. We talk through things together. You might use this as an extension activity for your students who are just killing it. You could assign this to them, or steal some of the questions, some of the videos, and build it into some of your other lessons. But those I think will be pretty useful to hit high levels of engagement. There's also Spanish versions linked there if that pertains to you. Lastly, I've also linked the practice assessment and summative assessment for each of the concepts. Why I did that, we don't want to be teachers who teach to a test, but we want to be teachers who teach towards a test. And like I mentioned above about the quarter test, these are where I pull the questions for those quarter tests from. And so let's open up a summative. It'd be useful for you first to look through these before going into the lesson, so you have a good idea of what's the language that Discovery Ed uses. What are the high topics that they question a lot? Vocabulary, those sorts of ideas. And then maybe you come here to steal questions for do nows or exit tickets. So that way students are seeing these questions multiple times. If you really dove deep into the concept, you can even assign these to students, see how they do. Like, I think this is a question that I pulled and is in the actual quarter test. So if students see these things prior, again, don't teach the test. We're not trying to tell students, when you see a question like this, make sure you answer this one. That's not what we're doing. But if they see these questions prior, they're going to feel like they're set up for success when they take that quarter test. Okay. And it also helps you with planning out what should be my focus be for this concept. And I think that'll be extremely useful. All right. That is the scope and sequence at a glance. Hopefully that helps you think about how you want to plan out your year, how you want to use that resource. My next video is going to be on the curriculum map and the resource. So I will see you 8th grade teachers at the next one. Thanks.